Hey everyone, it is Monday. You know what that means? It means we start our expert series, and we always start strong with Greg Dickerson. How you doing?
Doing great, Michael. How are you?
Excellent, folks. As we get started, do Greg and I a favor. Give us a quick thumbs up. We want to help this video out. And as Grant Steffen says, that you got to get more thumbs up early. So I'm going to ask for that. And if you like being a part of this series, make sure to subscribe and check out the playlist. We have hours of interviews with Greg there that you can go back and watch. And he provides amazing details every week. So Greg, thank you very much for doing this. I have so much fun every week.
Yeah, it's good to be here. And, Michael, you've got an HD camera now, so you guys can compare the before and after.
Thank you for pointing that out. That was fun. We hit
You look a
10,000.
lot younger today, I thought. I didn't know what was going on.
Oh, you are so funny. You know what we're going to do today is we're going to attack a topic in two parts. So we're going to have a part A and a part B to this series, folks. So if you like part A, stay tuned for part B. It will be a separate video. But I think there is going to be tremendous opportunity ahead. And unfortunately, we have to get through some pain first. So why don't we start positive? Why don't we start with the upside? Greg, when you look out to next year, whenever that is, middle of next year, late next year, when the economy is going again, we've got the election behind us. We have a vaccine, or at least treatments that take death off the table for the most at risk. Where do you see the greatest opportunity as we start another bull market?
So, there will be recovery, and there's going to be a lot of areas, for opportunities depending on how they look. But obviously, reopening a business, so there's going to be a lot of empty spaces, restaurants, retail, things like that are going to be available, and you can cut some really good deals. So if you're looking to open a business, start a business, reopen a business that maybe you closed, you'll be able to get some really great deals on spaces, on different kinds of spaces, whether it's office, retail, restaurant, whatever it is. Some of them might even be turnkey, upfit, ready to take over, so that you could get open very quickly. And there'll be some real incentives from the landlords to get people in and get businesses back opening again. So that'll be one opportunity, right there, is to take over some vacant spaces. There will be some distressed real estate where that's going to create opportunities to, walk in and take over some assets. So maybe you can do a subject to, deal where you take title to a property and then do something with it, either sell it or lease option it, or, renovate it and flip it, whatever you want to do. There'll be some opportunities to jump into some commercial multifamily deals where maybe they need a little equity. If you've got some cash to put to work, you can come in and provide some liquidity and get some ownership and some nice assets that way. And then, there's going to be just general opportunities as the economy continues to change and we continue more towards this, e-commerce, virtual economy, online marketplace that's out there. Depending on where you come from, let's say if you lost a job or something like that, there's a lot of different ways that you can leverage your skill sets and your expertise into the new economy moving forward in the world of e-commerce and the virtual economy that we have right now.
Yeah, I'm really excited by the opportunities that I see in 2021. And frankly, I think some of the opportunities that are going to be just amazing, we won't see because we're like, oh, that's a great idea somebody had, right? There's been, if you go back and I've researched the Great Depression, there were a lot of millionaires created in the Great Depression, right? Everybody starts struggling and then you have a great idea and you just move forward. One of them that I'm betting on is because of the pain in the hotel sector. My
Yeah.
my sneaky suspicion is, I don't know, sometime late next year, there will be some cities, and I'm looking at San Francisco specifically, that have too many hotel rooms, and they're going to go, you know what? We've talked about affordable housing for decades. Let's change the rules and regulations and allow somebody to take over a shuttered hotel and convert them to studios, or maybe they make them one bedrooms for some kind of minimum square footage. So they merge units together. But I see some pretty, I see some opportunities for cities if they think ahead to tackle some really big problems. And that will include with some investors, right? Just again, taking shuttered hotels and turning them into affordable housing, I think is something that's coming, or maybe that's a hope, but I think it's going to come. What do you think?
Yeah, hotels, office buildings, senior living facilities. So there'll be a lot of adaptive reuse going on, retail spaces, turning
Exactly.
into other uses. Affordable housing is it's a different tricky conversation, and there's not usually a lot of appetite for that. And, that will take a big movement on the part of, local, state, federal governments to kind of help fund, those types of things. And then, The question is, how sustainable is that long term? So that's a great, it's a great idea. And, a lot of different cities are trying that all over the country. And it's, we haven't found a good solution to affordable housing yet.
Yeah, I totally agree. That's why I hope they take a shot. I mean, you're gonna have, I don't know, what's the average hotel room? 200 square feet, 180 square feet, something like that. They're not very big, right?
Yeah.
But
Yeah. They're small.
if you put them together, you could have a 400 square foot studio. I mean, if you really want to get after
Well,
affordable housing, think different.
yeah, 400 square foot. That's a penthouse in New York, right? So, yeah. So,
Yeah.
micro apartments are a thing. And that was something that was very popular before the pandemic. A lot of people living in urban centers that didn't need a lot of space and, you know, um, converting old hotels into apartments. So that's been done and is something that's being done, especially the garden style travel lodges,
Yeah.
2-story buildings, exterior entry. Those are real easy conversions. So that is something that's being done. It's great. It makes great student housing. It makes great affordable housing, and it makes great, market rate housing in a lot of areas as well. So the question is, what's the demand? What are the incentives going to look like? And depending on, the administration next year, you know, a lot of those tax incentives of real estate and affordable housing and stuff might go away,
Yeah.
because the tax code is going to be under attack, to try to raise revenue to do some of these things. But if you think about affordable housing, well, it's generally tax incentives that provide the incentive and the opportunities for people to do affordable housing. So if you take that away, you got to do something else. And modern monetary theory, is one of those avenues that people say, look, the government can just print money, build and provide these things for the public. And, it's essentially free.
Yeah. The other thing, again, some of this I will admit is wishful thinking or playing an interesting game of chess without all the pieces. I take that. But one of the things I just read in Gap, right? Gap, the retailer,
Hmm.
they came out and said basically they're going to exit malls and they're actually going to go stand alone, right? So when I think of retail, I think retail is going to change going forward, right? Maybe it's
Yeah.
less about malls, it's less about bringing everybody together, and it's more about, Gap is going to go take a 2,000 square foot building on some nice corner and make it an experience, right? It's the Gap experience. It's not
Hmm.
diluted by all these other stores. And Gap is a first mover. It's the first retailer that I've heard talk about it in this pandemic or health crisis. And I'm like, you know what? There could be something there. And again, if you are a developer like yourself, Greg, looking at that, maybe you have to think about building strip malls different or building, I mean, just that idea from the Gap could cause someone like you or your peers to go, man, I could take a dirt lot and make it, two, Gap like stores, Gap here and then, Nike over there or two
Hmm.
competitors. So, I mean, there's just a lot of stuff that could be coming our direction, I think.
Yeah, it's interesting. The indoor mall, is becoming a thing of the past before the pandemic, and I don't really understand why. I like our mall. I like, but it's expensive real estate for retailers. It's very difficult for them to thrive and survive in. And, the institutional owners of these assets have driven rent rates through the roof to where they
Mm,
just don't make any sense.
yeah.
So first thing you got to think of as a developer, like, a lot of people think I'm going to get into development, make all this money and squeeze every nickel out of real estate. If your tenants aren't successful, you're not going to be successful. So your first motive should not be to squeeze as much money as possible out of a tenant. It should be, how do I put a tenant in business and keep them in business so that I can, maintain a cash flow and be successful in the property. So that's one end of the spectrum in terms of, it's an interesting conversation. Why is the indoor mall in and of itself dying, and why was it dying pre-COVID? What is it about that? Now, what is doing well? Lifestyle centers, outside environment, and some of that is partially enclosed, some of it's exterior. Those malls and centers, were doing well. And then, of course, neighborhood strip centers have been on the rise, and they're doing extremely well. A freestanding single tenant um, Gap, I'm not so sure that is sustainable.
Okay.
I could see it in a strip environment, outdoor strip environment, like you said, with a couple other retailers, like an outlet center or something like that.
Mhm.
But I just can't see Gap. I don't think they have a big enough demand or market share. I mean, weren't they in bankruptcy and just are trying to come out of it?
Yeah. Yeah. Again, this is just something they just put out. Again, they're going to consolidate footprint, less footprint, more focus. I mean, it's a play, right? I read it last week, so it's just coming out.
That makes sense. But putting a Gap, freestanding on a street corner, I don't think that's going to do anything for Gap. I think, if you've got it where there's other retailers, that makes a lot of sense because where people
Right.
go where there's more of, yeah, it's not a Walgreens, it's not a Walmart, it's not a grocery store. So I think that is a bad move, and I would
Sure.
not be a developer that would want to put a gap,
Fair
in
enough.
a single tenant net lease situation.
Very cool. The other thing they talked about, just to wrinkle this together, is they're going to go far more e-commerce, right? That we've seen that become a thing,
Hmm.
right? And I'm wondering,
Yeah.
right? I think you and I talked months ago about Amazon buying J.C. Penney's because they wanted to turn them into Amazon fulfillment centers, right?
Hmm.
I'm wondering if the Gap is going, hey, you know what? Let's go take a, I don't know, 4 or 5 acre plot of land. Let's put our distribution center in the back, and then we'll have a, a freestanding store up front. Again, I read an article. I'm just guessing, but I mean, there's lots of ways you can kind of tie all these things together, right?
Hmm. Yeah, yeah. It's interesting. There is still going to be a certain segment of the population that will not buy everything online, and I'm one of them. I tried to order shoes online. I don't like it. I like to
Yeah.
try my shoes on, turn them back in there because then you got a hassle. They're not supposed to charge you for restocking fees. Then they do. Then you got to make a phone call for a $15 whatever.
Yeah.
So there's a certain amount of things that people still want to go touch, feel, and all that, which basically become storefronts for their e-commerce business. Because
Yeah.
hey, if you don't
Exactly.
have the right size, we can order it for you.
Yeah.
That kind of thing. So it's interesting, how it's changing and where it's ultimately going to be. But I'm not a fan of, and never really have been a fan of, freestanding single tenant net lease because
Okay.
you've got one tenant, and when they're gone, it's very difficult to backfill that.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. All right, so something else I want to kick around. It's you actually brought it up when you were first laying this out. Is the ability to come in as new equity, right? There
Hmm.
are deals that have been put together in the last couple of years that are probably already in technical default, and at some point, financial institutions will make a call. Some of them will just replace the operator and extend and pretend, but some of these deals are going to go, nope, we're going to take them back. And
Hmm.
if you're in the network of these financial institutions, you could come into some pretty sweet opportunities, right?
Yeah, yeah. We were talking about CMBS one time, and I think one of your people left a comment asking, why would a lender declare a perfectly good performing property in default? Because they want it paid off. So that's the first step. If you want your property paid off, you put it in technical default, which there's a lot of different ways a lender can declare a property in technical default, even though you're making the payments. If your balance sheet changes, if
Mhm.
your, whatever changes, you can be declared in default, and they can call your loan due so that you'll pay it off. So that's why a lender would do that to an otherwise good asset. But yeah, I mean, there's already, I get phone calls regularly from brokers and other investors that have properties that they're looking to just give away. Hey, just take over the debt. Wipes out all the equity investors, when that happens, but they're willing to turn over the asset. You just take over the loan as is. The problem is with a lot of those deals, what's the underlying loan? With interest rates where they are now, what I'm seeing a lot of multifamily deals that have assumable loans, man, they're at 4.5, 5%, whereas you can get 2.8 to 3% on some of these multifamily assets. So it's very expensive to step into these deals and try to make them work now moving forward, especially if there's any kind of an equity raise that you have to put on top of it.
Mm.
So a lot of people are trying to get rid of these assumable loans where the interest rates are in the fours and fives, and they're not having much luck right now.
Yeah. So again, just trying to talk this through. So if somebody in your network, I'll just call it a bank for lack of a better term, calls you up and says, "Hey, I have this asset. We're going to take it back. Would you take it over for the loan balance?" In today's world, you would want that loan balance recast and the rate set at current market instead of just assuming, correct?
Exactly. Yeah.
And that would mean the previous owner, there would actually have to be a foreclosure then, right? Because the bank would have to officially take it back.
Well, not necessarily. It could be for an assumption, yeah. So either you step into the shoes and you just take over the loan,
Mhm.
and the bank could potentially, if it's a portfolio lender, rework that loan.
Okay.
So that's one scenario where they wouldn't have to actually foreclose. You just
Okay.
do a loan assumption, you renegotiate the loan term and the rate, and do all that. That can be done at the local regional level. When you get into these CMBS deals and stuff like that, and agency debt, that's not going to happen.
Yeah, you got to wash it
So at
out,
that
start over.
point, you're either assuming existing terms, or the loan needs to be paid off, and then there's usually a prepayment penalty that's significant.
Hmm.
So the sellers, don't want to do that from a buyer standpoint. Doesn't make sense. Why would I pay more,
Hmm.
for the asset just to get a lower rate? Unless it makes sense, then you might do it if there's competition for the asset. It's a good enough asset, but that's kind of how that works. It
Yeah.
just really depends on who has the debt
Yeah.
and what they can and what they're willing to do.
Yeah. And, having worked with a couple of financial institutions on multifamily deals last crisis, they get really flexible when the asset is not being treated well. Because
Yeah,
I think,
especially smaller banks.
Mhm.
Smaller banks, if it's a bad loan, they want it off the books. They just want it gone.
Mhm.
Because that affects their ability to lend. So whenever you have a loan that's in default, that goes on to into the special servicing arm of the bank. That's a black mark and takes the amount of money that they can lend tenfold out of the equation. So if it's $1 million, then that keeps them from lending 10 million bucks.
Yeah. So let's talk about single family. I think there's going to be tremendous opportunity in single family. I think it's going to be I think there's going to be like 10 markets, maybe it's 15 that are really hit, like Las Vegas, San Francisco, New York, the big urban cities we've talked about all this time.
Single family housing market.
Yeah, single family. Yeah. And where I'm seeing the pain in these markets is they're going, unemployment, for example, in San Francisco is over 12%. In Vegas, it's over 20%. In those markets, eventually the forbearance is going to be a problem, right? The jobs are not coming back. So I'm suspecting that we are going to have the opportunities you said in your intro to take over some assets subject to in the single
Hmm.
family market. And as investors, we will be able to do that. And unlike the commercial market we just talked about, we'll be able to get rates that we as investors can't get, right? Because we'll be taking over owner occupant debt, which
Hmm.
could be in the low threes. Um, do you see that as something that's potentially possible late next year, middle of next year?
If you can't sell the houses. So subject
Yes,
to
correct.
only becomes a viable model when you have a distressed seller that cannot otherwise sell the home. Now, from what I understand, the Vegas market's still red hot right now. So the question is, will the jobs come back and when will they come back? And I think Vegas will rebound as soon as vaccines and treatments. I think Vegas is Vegas. People love Vegas, and they're going to be back as soon as they can. Convention business, as soon as it's safe to do so.
Yeah.
That's a V-shaped market right there. They're going to come back instantly. New York, not so much. San Francisco, not so much. Seattle, Chicago, those types of cities, very different animal. But Vegas, that's like Disneyland.
Mhm.
As soon as you open Disneyland back up, people are going to be there if they don't have to wear masks and it's safe. And we've got vaccine and treatments. They don't have to worry about the virus. So that's an interesting question there in terms of the Vegas market and what that'll do. The one thing to watch for the housing market in general is, our interest rates, right? Interest rates is what controls the housing market. And if you look at rates back in 2018, rates were almost twice as much as they are now. It doesn't seem, it's like, how can they be twice as much? It was almost like, 5%. We're about 2.8 now. So it was right at about almost double what the rates are now. But housing prices have not doubled since then, which is interesting. They've gone up, 10, 15, 20%, whatever it is, but they haven't doubled, although the rates have been cut in half. So what the interesting thing is, if rates double from here, housing prices could potentially get cut in half. So that is one way that the housing market could drop 50%. What's going to raise interest rates? Yields on treasuries. When treasuries go up, when the government starts borrowing money, if we get this huge stimulus, which again, stimulus is life support. It's not stimulus. It's not going to stimulate anything. It's just keeping us alive, but there's going to be more money needed to be spent to stimulate the economy to actually produce growth. And when that happens, the government has to issue more treasuries. And when the government's issuing more treasuries, the only way they're going to get buyers is they have to issue at higher rates. Because at some point, buyers are going to be like, wait a minute, there's too many of these things. I need more incentive to buy them. And they're going to compare that investment with bonds and mortgage bonds and all that stuff. So that's what drives mortgage rates up. So if we start to see that, then you could have a real problem, when you factor in, forbearance and things like that. Although, participation in that program's down.
Mhm.
People just took a payment holiday is what they did. And the lenders are not at the end of that forbearance period, which is just putting the brakes on. It's just saying, look, don't make your payment. It's not uh, default. It's not foreclosure. It's just don't worry about your payments. But at the end of that, something has to happen. You either
Mhm.
pay it, whatever the back payments were, or you rework the mortgage. So all the lenders are reworking the mortgages. They're not foreclosing. So that whole mortgage forbearance default bomb that everybody thinks is going to happen isn't going to happen. If you have a loan and you can afford to make that payment, but you couldn't afford to make it in the previous 6 months, or when we get to the end of this cycle, of the forbearance period, which is supposed to be the end of the year, and you can't make the payments, they're going to keep you going. They're not going to start a foreclosure wave because it's not in the best interest of anybody to do that, especially when you have the government behind you backing everything up and propping it up and um, continuing to perpetuate that. So I don't think the forbearance issue is going to be as big as everybody thinks it is.
Yeah, agree with you 100%. I've done multiple videos on it. I don't think the forbearance and the eviction crisis is going to be nearly as bad as people are, seeing it's going to be in the 2021 crash. I do think it will have compounding effects like in San Francisco, right?
Mm-hmm.
San Francisco's already, listings are up, price cuts are happening. So
Yeah.
when you have a market that's already softening and people are losing equity, which is really what you talked about with interest rates rising, people are losing equity with prices coming
Yeah.
down. And then you have the person that's sitting there going, hey, I took out a $1.8 million loan for my, piece of junk 1950s home, and now it's worth 1.6. Boom. Then you're talking strategic default like we did back in 06, 07, 08.
Maybe if they can't afford it. The thing
Right.
is that's very different is if you borrowed at 2.8, 2.5, 3%, you're not going to get that loan amount anymore. So
Mhm.
it may, for some people, it'll
Yeah.
make sense for them, even if their house value is going down, they got to live somewhere.
Right.
They got the house of their dreams. They want it. So as long as the payment still works, they're going to stay in the house. The problem with the strategic default was interest rates were going up. A lot of the loans were adjustable rate mortgages. So people's
Exactly.
payments were going up. So the strategic default was, wait a minute, my payment's going up. My value's coming down. I can buy the house across the street for half as much. Why stay in this house?
Yeah.
So that's not going to happen this time.
Well,
You're not going.
there's one other
Go
wrinkle
ahead.
though. There's one more wrinkle, and that is employment. We are
Mhm.
seeing the tech industry vacate San Francisco.
Yeah.
So your employers are going, hey, no longer have to work here. We're going to shut down our office, work from home. We are seeing significant exodus from San Francisco. So you
Yeah. So
throw that on.
that's a different question. So that's a
Sure.
demand issue. So
Mhm.
if your demand side of the equation goes away, then yeah, then all bets are off, and people may potentially walk away from a house if there's no buyers, no whatever, no job. Why stay in San Francisco?
Yeah.
But
Mhm.
are they really going to leave if they can? If they don't have
Yeah.
to be there. They don't have to move. So yeah, that's a different animal. It's kind of like New York.
Yep.
It's a whole different ballgame.
Very cool. So kind of summarize this portion up. Where we see really great opportunity is a lot of businesses are going to open next year, have a chance to get record leases, right? 5, 6, 7-year leases at much
Hmm.
better rates. I do, like you, expect lots and lots of grand openings next year. I think that's going to be a tremendous thing. I think there will be tremendous opportunity in the commercial market, either getting in new equity or restructuring debt. Single family, it's probably a different story. Maybe not as much of an opportunity, but that's probably a good thing. Again, I don't see 2020 or 2021 pain being in single family. It's commercial and it's business creation. Is that a fair summary?
Absolutely. And I mean, here's the good news. Once we get the virus under control, vaccine treatments, the economy is going to come roaring back. Everybody wants to get out. Everybody wants to travel. Everybody wants to go back to the movies. They just want to make sure it's safe.
Yeah.
Schools reopening. So, boom, we're off to the races once you get this thing out of the way. And the government's going to throw as much cash as they need to help make that happen and bring the economy back fast.
Very, very cool, Greg. Well, thank you very much for doing this. This was the opportunity side, folks. Just so you know, there will be a video number 2 where we talk about the pain. We do have some pain to get through. So we're going to highlight where that is. And we'll talk about that in the next video. Thank you very much, Greg.